Well, everyone, let's go ahead and compare the iPad Air 5, the one that just came out, the M1 iPad Air, and compare it against the iPad 9th generation. Now, besides the Mini 6, these are some of the cheaper iPads you can buy. I mean, the iPad 9th generation is definitely one of the cheaper tablets you can buy that are still a really good value. So I'll leave some of these iPads linked down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, I will definitely tell you, if you have the money to spend, and if you're trying to find the better iPad between the two, the iPad Air 5 is definitely the better one between these. I mean, it beats the iPad 9th generation in almost every single area, except for the price tag. If you're on a budget, I'm going to tell you, even getting an iPad 8th generation is still a really good iPad in my opinion. The iPad 9 is very capable, it still has a lot of capability and power within it, and I'll tell you, for day-to-day activity and day-to-day tasks, you're probably not going to notice a crazy big amount of difference between these. Now, one thing I always want to tell people is that with iPads, even though the iPad 9th generation has a home button with Touch ID and everything, you can still utilize that gesture-based design on an iPad 9th generation. And that is one of the biggest differences you're going to see from going from like an iPhone with a home button to an iPhone without a home button. The gestures make things feel so much smoother. So even on the iPad 9th generation, it still feels like a pretty smooth iPad, and it definitely doesn't feel like a cheap iPad either. Now, the starting price for the iPad 9 is $329. With the student discount, it's a little bit cheaper. With the iPad Air 5, it's $599, and you can also get a student discount for that too. There are more color options for the iPad Air 5, so keep that in mind, and you're also getting a little bit of a bigger display on something like an iPad Air 5 as well. The Air 5 has that 10.9-inch Liquid Retina IPS panel. The iPad 9 has that 10.2-inch panel, so a little bit smaller. The resolutions are still fairly high on both, so you're not going to notice a crazy big difference. I will probably side with the iPad Air 5 having the bit better panel. I like having a bigger iPad, which is super nice to have, but also the lack of bezel around it and everything makes it look a little bit better than the iPad 9, but I really wouldn't pick up one iPad over the other just based off the design alone. There's a lot of other things where the iPad Air 5 is probably the better one. You have a lightning port on the bottom of the iPad 9th generation, where you have a USB Type-C port on the bottom of the iPad Air 5, and on the back you have aluminum backs on both. They both feel very premium. They do not feel cheap at all. You have single camera setups on the top left, but the iPad Air 5 has a much bigger camera. You also have Apple Pencil support on both these iPads, but the iPad 9 has Apple Pencil 1 support. The iPad Air 5 has that Apple Pencil 2 support, and I'm going to be honest, getting an iPad with that supports Apple Pencil 2, if you're somebody who uses an Apple Pencil a lot, is probably one of the better things you can do in my opinion. It will be so much more convenient to charge your iPad from the side than having to plug it into the bottom every single time. I can definitely see how that can be a daunting task for some people. If you don't use an Apple Pencil, then move on, but if you do, I'd probably go for the iPad Air 5 just because of that. So that kind of covers it up on the outside. Now we also have some differences in terms of the camera setup as well. So the iPad 9th generation has a back 8 megapixel wide angle lens, with the iPad Air 5 has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens on the back. Now weirdly enough, we do have 12 megapixel sensors on the front of both of these. So it's weird because the iPad 9th generation has a better front facing camera than the back camera in my opinion. Now with the iPad 9, I think it's still a pretty good sensor. You're not going to really miss out on too much. I don't really know too many people who are using their iPads as their main machine to film videos with or do anything with really. Our iPhones have better cameras than both of these iPads, but I will say for the iPad Air 5 to have this great of a camera setup is actually pretty surprising. It's pretty much on par with like an iPhone XR. I think that's the best way to put it. The front facing camera is much better than even a lot of iPhones. Having an ultra wide sensor on both of these is actually really nice to have. So if you're somebody who's going to be utilizing the front camera to do, meet calls, to do FaceTimes or do anything like that, well then you're going to have a much better time on either one of these. But if you're using the back camera a lot for any reason, well the iPad Air 5 may be the better one for you. Personally, I like having the ability of having that ultra wide sensor, and it is a really cool thing to have. So when it comes down to both of these, in my opinion, the back cameras, definitely side for the iPad Air 5, but the iPad 9 and the iPad Air 5 have almost the same exact thing on the front, so it's really not that big of a difference to be honest. So in terms of the camera setup, that kind of covers it up there. Now in terms of the longevity between these two, Apple does their software longevity and how long they're going to be supporting these iPads based off the chipsets inside. The iPad 9th generation kind of has the same chipset as pretty much the iPhone 11. So because of that, the iPhone 11 is pretty much going to be supported for quite a bit of time, and also because a lot of devices now support that A13 chipset, including this iPad, including I think another iPad too, but including that Apple Studio display Apple just made. I mean, this thing is going to be lasting for quite a bit of time, and it's probably not going to be unsupported anytime soon. So because of that, Apple is going to be supporting this thing probably for many more years to come. Now with the iPad Air 5, it does have that M1 chipset inside of it. So we're really unsure of how long these M1 iPads are going to last. I'm going to assume they're going to outperform or outbeat the A15. I don't know 100% fact yet, but if I had to guess, I mean, it would probably have to be something like that. I doubt Apple would sell an iPad Air 5 with an M1 chipset that's more expensive than the iPad mini 6 that has the A15 and the A15 beats it. So I don't know what's going to happen here. Apple's spending a lot of time on this M1 chipset and marketing it and everything. So I think the M1 chipset is definitely going to beat the iPad 9th generation, but I don't know if it's going to outbeat the A15 Bionic chips that we have now. So I'll keep you guys updated there, but that kind of leads us into the performance side of things. So both of these, again, kind of a little bit of a different setup. The 9th gen iPad does have that A13 chip. The iPad Air 5 has that M1 chipset. Now with the iPad 9th generation, this is a very smooth iPad and it's a very fast iPad for sure. I've used this thing for quite a bit of time now, for a few months, and it's not a slow iPad and it's not a bad iPad. I think the best way to kind of describe it is that if you are thinking about this thing from a pure dollar per value standpoint, this is a very valuable iPad. This thing will give you a lot of value and a lot of capability with a smaller price tag, which is actually a really nice thing. And I love having an iPad that gives this much quality and capability with such a lower price tag. Now, if you want to save some money, like I mentioned, you can go for the 8th or 7th gen, but those are much slower. The iPad 9th generation, for what it is, for heavy intensive gaming, for all that kind of stuff, you are definitely getting a really solid iPad from the iPad 9th generation. Now with the iPad Air 5, I think this is a very solid iPad as well. I think this iPad has a lot of capability and it is not a cheap iPad at all. This thing feels extremely premium. It has a lot of capability within it. And really the main thing to keep in mind with the iPad Air 5 is that the RAM is the big difference here. You're getting a lot better, RAM management because you're getting more RAM on the iPad Air 5, but you're also getting a better chipset. I mean, that chipset is pretty much on par with what we have on our MacBooks nowadays. And our MacBooks have historically been a lot more powerful than a lot of iPads, and because of that, we're probably going to be getting a much better setup on our iPad Air 5 than the iPad 9th generation. So because of that, I'm probably going to tell you picking up something like the iPad Air 5 is going to be the better way here. It's going to give you much better performance, but you would still be surprised how great of a performing iPad the iPad 9th generation is. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now battery life, I have found that my iPad 9 gives me amazing battery life. However, on Apple's website, they do give you pretty much the same exact battery life. So 10 hours of surfing the web. I don't know why they still call it like that. And then they say up to 9 hours of surfing the web using cellular data network. So they kind of guesstimate it's going to be roughly around the same. I'm probably going to honestly side for the iPad 9, but both these iPads will be able to, last for quite a bit of time. So you're really not going to have too many issues there when it comes down to it. So in terms of, battery life, that covers it up there. And to be completely honest, when it comes down to both these iPads, I think the iPad 9th generation is still a better value per dollar. And I do think it's a better deal than something like the iPad Air 5. I think the iPad Air 5 is the better iPad here for sure, but it is, a couple $100 more expensive than something like the iPad 9. So I think the iPad 9 is the better value per dollar. But if you don't really have too much of a budget, or if you're wondering, should I go from an iPad 9 and iPad Air 5? Is it worth the extra money to upgrade? I would say yeah, I think it's definitely worth the extra money to upgrade. I think it's a much more powerful machine. I think it has, a lot more capability and it has a better future ahead of it. But with something like the iPad 9, I just always kind of come back to it and I'm like, well, that's still a really good iPad too. So in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.